So hi, welcome to Out of the Blue, a podcast about all the great things that are coming from the TU Delft, the Delft University of Technology. And today we have a very special episode. We are not in Delft, we're at the Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven at Van Berlo agency. And we're talking to Elif Özcan-Vieira. Welcome, Elif.
Hi, welcome, Ianus. Oh, sorry, thank you.
No, it's good. First of all, why are we here?
Well, it's a fascinating week for Dutch design and also for Dutch society. We are here to showcase what future could be like, and we are trying to solve some societal issues as well.
What the future is like.
Yes, what the future is like.
Ah, nice. So why in Eindhoven? So the Dutch Design Week is a big thing for all designers. Everybody comes over here. But you've been working with Van Berlo?
We have collaborated in the past with Van Berlo for some specific project on understanding user context. And now we are collaborating in hosting the Embassy of Health exhibition here. So
wonderful. So we'll get back to your exhibition a bit later on. But so how was it to be this week here in Eindhoven? Was it tiring or elevating or nice?
Well, it's been an overwhelming week. We've been accelerated, of course, because to share our design solutions and also to create awareness to certain sensitive topics was amazing. And not only that, but I have come to realize that we have fantastic students in our faculty. They put all their energy and passion in creating design solutions of the future, and creating these prototypes were just another learning experience for them, and we are sharing all of it here together.
Oh, wonderful. I think the audience can't wait to sort of see it at the end so we'll sort of do a walkthrough at the end of this. But first, I really want to know, so your name, it's not a Dutch name. So how did you get here at the TU Delft?
Yeah, that's quite a long history, actually. I was born in Turkey and to Turkish parents. But after my studies in industrial design, I fell in love with this fantastic Portuguese man, and I moved to Portugal. I worked as an interaction designer. Interaction design at the time was, very new, and we were trying to explore the field. I did design interactive TV solutions for MTV in Portugal. So that was an amazing experience, but something in me pushed me forward or towards academia. I come from a family with people doing PhDs, so my hunger for scientific knowledge couldn't be stopped.
Oh, so it's hereditary. So my kids will do research once as well.
Well, I think we have a little one definitely is going to be a scientist exploring all the time. But later on, I found an amazing opportunity for a PhD in the field of industrial design, but with a specialization on sound design. And I thought, there are not that many of us, so I should better apply. And, I ended up in Delft.
Oh, wow, because you already did, so you studied industrial design, but you had a passion for sound already.
Yes, I did, yeah.
So your graduation, did that have anything with sound?
No, I come from a generation of private radio stations. Yeah. There was this boom. Maybe you remember Star Radio and things like that. They were quite, FM radios were getting very, very popular. And I was a teenager at the time, and I was fascinated what people could do only with sound. Just the power of sound and all the messages that you could convey. So, and when I entered the Middle East Technical University for my studies, I quickly discovered there was a radio station. I knocked on their door and I said, I want to be here, what can we do? So I worked as a sound designer. I'm a self-taught sound designer. And that knowledge came with me to Portugal as an interaction designer, and then later on in TU Delft as a PhD student on sound design.
Yeah, so you worked at a radio station in Ankara,
Yeah.
but also so the MTV. You also sort of interaction design was not purely visual, but also audio, sound.
It was about information design mostly, how to navigate through interactive TV. So that was I was interested in designing icons, and and yes, there were also some sound interactions too.
Because that is it, because what I remember from your PhD project is that it really was about the sounds that a vacuum makes and stuff like that, but you were able to translate it into sort of iconography, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think sound design is one of my interests, and the other part is I'm interested in information design as well. And when you think of information design, it doesn't come only in the form of sound. It is about how can I communicate a certain concept as efficiently as possible with little information. This could be visual information or auditory information. So during my PhD, what I had done is that I realized there were no good tools to communicate about sounds. It was a very understudied topic. I am one of the few who came up with the theory of product sounds. So we thought, how can we communicate about sounds? So we created icons that would represent different sound-producing features of a product. So engine would be represented by one icon, or a fan would be represented by another, and we could make a grammar. Cumulative, all these visual icons would indicate a product sound, would trigger some memory associations about a product sound.
And that helped designers sort of predict how a product would sound if they would bring it to the market?
Most of all, to communicate. Sometimes we don't have the language. We say that I hear a vacuum cleaner sound, but we hear the cumulative sound, and there are different parts. As a designer, you would want to say, actually, there is a fan sound, and perhaps we should be looking at the fan sound if we want to improve the sound of a vacuum cleaner. Or someone would say, if we change the engine, if we get a more powerful one, perhaps let's look at the sound of that. So this would allow us really dissect the cumulative product sound into pieces. So it was just a tool to start communicating about sounds.
Yeah, and so in my sort of ideas that people sort of, you talk about an engine sound and a fan sound, and then if I think as a product designers, these are all bad and they need to be avoided, right? Is that what you find with people that design as well?
What we did during my PhD was, actually we did discover that these sounds, product sounds, are found as a nuisance.
Yeah.
Except for example, coffee makers. And then people say, I love the sound of an espresso machine because that has an emotional connotation to drinking a beautiful cup of coffee.
Ah, yeah.
Or, many experts would say that I love the sound of a V8 engine, and this motorbike has that one, so let's go for it and let's go wild. So not all the sounds are perceived well, but it is the context that allows us to, respond to them. But very often, product sounds like the sounds of your toothbrush. You don't want to hear it because you think you're maybe disturbing your family, or
fans in computers.
Fans in computers. And I mean, they have consequences on your health too. I mean, imagine hearing sound constantly the whole day. It's equivalent to playing a computer game with visual stimuli. So whatever we hear has an impact on our hearing system. So all the cells are activated the whole day. And that makes us really cognitively tired, but also this perceptual tiredness can cause headaches or other things. So it's a little bit complicated. We should really understand what product are we talking about, and in what environment are we using, and who is the user, and what do they want to do with the product or with the sound. And then we can understand whether it's a nuisance or it's an opportunity for us to explore further.
Because, so I know one of the sort of famous stories about positive sound, luxury sound, is that they talk about the doors of the BMW, sort of the sound of that door has been designed by someone.
Yeah.
Did you sort of, is this a true story, by the way, or is it?
Of course.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's a true story, and imagine that when you want to buy a car, the first thing you touch is the car door.
So the click of the...
The click of the... And the second thing is, of course, you sit behind the steering wheel and the stick. Those are the three things to touch. But the sound of a door indicates how sophisticated the engineering is.
Ah.
So sound design is a design process, right? And the more effort you put in it, the more sophisticated and high level your product is going to be. That means better noise enclosures, or that means better materials that are not shaking, and there's no such allowances for vibrations.
Tolerance and vibration, yeah.
So all that effort that's put in sound design then is apparent in the way the car door closes. In the 80s, Toyota had created supercomputers just to emulate these sounds and then predict this auditory quality through, this computer-aided design. So, yeah, true stories.
So because that's actually, so that brings me to sort of the next point. As you said, you're sort of one of the few people that both does product design and sound design, and then that automatically brings me to the tools that you use, because the tools sort of influence the outcome. So what sort of did you find? So even today in sort of your practice, sort of when you're teaching students to design sound, do you notice that the tools influence the outcome, and sort of do you have some ideas about? Yeah, not sort of saying what is the best tool, but how does that sort of work?
No, definitely. Unfortunately, there are not that many tools for sound design. There are a couple of institutions throughout Europe, like IRCAM in Paris. They really work and understand how we can design sounds and what tools can we offer. Even in a recent European project indicated whether our communication about sounds would be enhanced with our gestures. Because sounds are event, whether we could use our voice and gesture to communicate about the sound that we want to design.
Oh, you mean sort of as a designer, you sort of gesture out the way you want your product to sound, or something like an instrument?
Like an instrument. They would make really voice imitations of, if I ask you what does the V8 engine sound like, you would start to imitate. I'm not going there for our fans of V8 engine not to, change their perception on the sound. But yes, so it is, there are all these tools that we are developing. But one of the tools that are missing is like designing alarms or alarm-like notification sounds. It looks like they are very easy to create in a simple sound-edited program, but it is not so. We have a notion of what alarms could sound like, and none of that theory is really reflected in a simple sound-edited program. And it's one of my aims in the near future, is to develop this tool for sound designers and come, for example, to the companies like Van Berlo or other design companies to go and then give training, and so that these companies can be on their own, design their own sound, and gain knowledge on that, the way that they would use Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator to create, beautiful posters or logos, or and that kind of, say, public access to sound design tools is, definitely missing.
Yeah, but then even a step earlier, so that's sort of the refinement of that sound. But I think even where to start, right? So. So as you said, the VR sort of making that noise, if I were to design a sound now, I would sort of, be making these crazy noises as a way to communicate that. And maybe that feels awkward, but is that a tool that designers already use, or?
Well, what I suggest when a student comes or when a company comes, I move away from sound design first of all, and I say, what is it that what effect do you want to have? Yeah. Can we first talk about that, define it? In our, Design for Interaction Master program, we teach our students to have an interaction vision, right? It's the same way that to create this interaction vision, how do we envision this sound to have an effect on the user or how this sound guides the user has to be first defined. And this process is a conceptual design process. And it
But
can
still
be
a visual design process.
visual design process.
And
oh, well, also semantic.
Yeah, sort of words and associations. But are there sometimes, have you seen like students really use sounds, like soundscapes as a way to sort of already get into the mood or not?
One of the investigations that they, and again, we as educators tell them to do to explore their world and to find interaction sounds. So that's a very important synthesization tool.
Yeah.
Touch everything.
And awareness.
Be aware, listen, and when you want to have a cute sound, go check what cute is around you. Not only visual, a cat can look cute, but it doesn't have to sound cute. I want you to find that very cute little sound. For example, I discovered myself when I go on my bike on the loose tiles on the road, I find that sound very satisfying and very somehow immature, but at the same time cute.
Yeah.
You know, and I have that sensitivity, and I would hope that designers could also just learn to listen to the sound and become sensitive and then verbalize. Verbalization is very, very important in communication, but also for the designer themselves.
Yeah. And so is that, I think that's interesting, sort of the awareness, and then you're hearing the bike and you're sort of thinking, hey, this sounds, this has an association like this and this with me. Do you also, could you also imagine sort of people collecting the sounds themselves, or sort of a Pinterest notion of sound?
I did capture many of these sounds, and we have our phones as recording tools, and you know, you can always use that. But like you said, our awareness to sound as a public or as a society
as a consumer,
is not there yet. And the way Instagram has changed, you know, how we would frame a beautiful picture, how we would frame a beautiful table or our clothes is definitely changing people's aesthetics on imagery, right? And Pinterest allows that again visually, and it would be very nice to have, for example, such tools to collect sounds, to talk about sounds, maybe even have instead of emojis or the gifts, to have auditory responses to conversation, right?
Yeah, sort of the soundboards that...
make a surprised sound or make a sound of a tired person, you know?
Wonderful. Yeah, so I could imagine sort of a keyboard of sounds, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, you know, maybe you remember, we are from the same generation. In the radio stations in the past, there would be these effects, sound effects.
Yeah, a soundboard, right?
Soundboard, yeah, and then you would click and then try to...
Bit corny, but still interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's still popular with many of the radio stations. Do you think that sort of having that collection? I was thinking maybe the notion of movies, because now in Instagram there are movies and they have sound with them. Currently, people just turn off the sound, basically, right? But you could imagine sort of the awareness we now have in editing movies quickly, sort of would also teach people to edit audio the same way, right?
Definitely. Like all those filters that we use on Instagram, there are such filters for designing sounds as well.
Yeah, you can be underwater in a big room.
In a big room, do you want to give a cathedral effect, or you know, do you want to give us a very cozy environment? So that's one of the things that I would hope to see happening. And so actually, I would invite anyone who would want to work on that topic.
And in my experience, students that are interested in doing a graduation or a project in audio, it's usually related to music, right? So music is of course is popular with students, with people, but then it's sort of about making instruments and stuff like that. So is that also a part of your research? Like so when is something a product sound and when does it become music?
Definitely. So music is the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
We have noise,
Yeah.
and we have music. Music is supposed to be pleasant to hear, but it also has the power to evoke emotions. And noise is just the compilation of all frequencies, very loud. It's not meaningful. And
Although some people, like the old people, always say you're listening to noise, right?
yeah,
Your music is noise.
your music is noise to indicate that it's meaningless. I
Too
guess.
much.
Too much, or too loud, or and especially when you design alarms, you go within the continuum. Like, am I making music? So we use music theory when we want to design alarm sounds. Because alarm sounds, they are musical motifs. They are very short, but they may be pure sine waves that would imitate certain notes, musical notes. And it's a repetition of a couple of notes that would create a tune, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yes, music theory becomes helpful, but at the same time, we can learn a lot from music in terms of why is it perceived so pleasant?
Yeah.
Why is it less annoying than other sounds? And for some projects, for example, in the intensive care unit, we try to bring music into the picture to also comfort the patient, but to understand the potential.
Yeah.
What can we learn from it and take it in order to improve the auditory scenery for intensive care unit.
Yeah, all right. So we're already moving into the topic. So you're so good at steering to the right way. So let's talk about the thing you are exhibiting here. So you are exhibiting the Critical Alarms Lab, and first of all, what is that lab? So what is it exactly?
Critical Alarms Lab was founded last year.
Last year, so it's 1 year old.
It's 1 year old by me.
Wonderful.
One man, one woman lab. But very, very quickly we have had fantastic students who were passionate about design for healthcare, solving issues in sound-related issues in the intensive care unit. So we focus all our energy in those topics. How do we understand the effect of sound in very critical environments? So with Critical Alarms, what we are trying to do is to inspire industry, regulatory agencies, or other institutions that designing for sound and with sound or against sound can provide many design opportunities for products. So we are not just interested in designing or altering the sound itself, but we are interested in a very broad design project, product design, or design for behavior change, or even artistic approaches. So we have a very good interest. But our aim is to think out of the box and be sensitive to the needs of the users. So I always say we design without borders so that we can inspire everyone in our network.
And so this is a Delft Design Lab, right? And that means you it is you and a set of graduate students, and you're working together with partners from industry?
Yes. Industry and also hospitals. Erasmus Medical Center is one of our main partners.
Yeah.
But also other academic institutions like University of Plymouth with Cognition Institute. They are also part of our group. I have currently 2 PhD students in our team as well that are interested in alarm fatigue or nurses' compliance behavior towards alarms. So those are interesting topics that provide us with knowledge. But I also have research interns who are interested in, for example, how sounds would have a negative impact on patients' sleep, and how can we design alarms that would not wake up the patient but would still be meaningful for the nurse. So yes, it is Delft Design Lab has started as a graduation lab, but now we are working in a multi-stakeholder environment, and we use Erasmus MC as our context living lab. It's a living lab where we bring companies who are interested in the topic, or other research institutes. For example, I collaborated with an artist from Washington, D.C., Yoko Sen, to design musical alarms, or cartoons, or collaborated with Vanderbilt University in the States again, with an anesthetist who is passionate about designing sounds, a musician also himself. So we reach out to the world, and we bring all that knowledge in one place, and we are based in TU Delft, and it's a fantastic place to be, honestly.
Nice, wonderful. So that's sort of, you generate knowledge and you share it out with other people, and because it's audio and music, automatically people sort of react on it and have their own ideas.
Yes.
And is there, so these PhDs, they are also going to, there are going to be sort of longitudinal studies in there.
Yeah, they are the backbones, right?
Oh, wonderful.
Because without research, none of these design solutions would make sense. We are interested in scientifically informed design solutions. So that the research part for me, fundamental research into alarms, or how we perceive sounds, or how we emotionally react to sounds, has to be there. And my research and the research of the PhD students, that definitely feeds our...
And are they all design related, or is it fundamental as in sort of what attributes work sort of getting sort of...
The researchers, you mean?
Yeah.
One of the PhD students is from linguistics.
Ah, nice.
Linguistics. So he's interested in the ecology of this environment that is so noisy. What causes the cacophony? How do nurses behave or interact with their environment? So when we look at alarms, we don't just see sound, but we see it as an object within an environment where everybody is interacting around it. A patient is influenced by it, a nurse needs it as a tool. The companies, manufacturers, they have to put it for regulatory agencies, they have directives, you have to respond, FDA, you have to respond all these rules. So we see it as it's a very complicated issue, and a linguist is able to see it from top down and look into this environment, but a designer is interested in solutions. So we try to cover and understand the sound phenomenon in a broader sense, but we can go really deep as well in each topic.
Yeah, and so we are at Van Berlo. The gnome is behind you. Were they also involved in the research itself, or just some of the graduations, or what is their scope?
With Van Berlo, I wanted a professional user researcher to help me understand how nurses experience the sound.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a phenomenon called alarm fatigue, and alarm fatigue is always defined by human factors and ergonomics people as sheer number of alarms, and then we count them and we try to see how it fits in the nurse's workflow. Yeah. But we as designers, especially human-centered design research, is interested how do people experience this? So that was missing in the literature. We have beautiful papers on defining what alarm fatigue is, also my PhD student, but I really, really was craving what do nurses feel? How do they interact with these sounds? How is it their day like? So
it's not the perception so when you come in as a nurse, it's not like the amount of sounds you hear, but sort of how, where, and when, sort of as a whole, right?
As a whole, yeah. And how does it fit in their workflow? Can we ask these questions? Or
so cause and effect, right? I'm doing something, and therefore an alarm goes off. Sure.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
Or please don't.
So Van Berlo being so good in this user context and research, we asked help.
Yeah.
Roselle van den Berg, a fantastic user researcher, has joined our lab, and she worked for us for 6 months, and we have defined the nurses' experience of soundscapes in the ICU, and that was really the start of design intervention. So what Roselle has left behind for us is the points of intervention.
Yeah.
And okay, we
So basically,
this.
Van Berlo sort of set the context for your critical alarms, labs, interventions,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. That's why we need these collaborations. That's why it's a multi-stakeholder problem, these critical alarms. And their expertise helped us pave the road and for us to clearly see what is actually needed. Yeah. But then we can fill those parts in. There are 3 products.
So this is a good point. Let's sort of in our minds walk towards the exhibition that you have here, and I've had a brief walkthrough, but this is part of the Embassy of Health in the Dutch Design Week, where sort of all health-related issues are. It's not purely Van Berlo, it's all kinds of things, right?
Yes, it's Embassy of Health tries to attract people's attention on the health-related solutions or issues or problems. There are fantastic, exhibitors here. Yeah. One of them is the virtual room for premature babies, and what would happen if they are born, but what would happen if they would be they still felt like they're in mommy's belly and protected and continue their gestation in the next 3 months. So these are very compelling and eye-opening solutions.
Provocations sometimes.
Provocations. So we also have the same aim. We want to draw attention to the problems in the intensive care. We define intensive cares as acoustically hostile environments, and there's a cacophony there.
Yeah, so when you enter you have a visualization of that. Eh? So we go to the exhibition, and when you enter, you see a big object, and what is that?
We see a big object that looks like a harp where you can touch, and floating intensive care tools and products to create. We wanted to create chaos, and we wanted to create cacophony. So when you are there, and the more people are there, the more sound it means. So you touch these chords, and you start to hear the cacophony. Yeah. And these are the sounds, actual recordings from intensive care units. And what we did here is to present it in an artistic way so that we have an impact right away. Whoever is visiting, it's the first thing they see or hear. And some people have goosebumps, how loud it can be. And
especially if they've been in that, probably, right? Then it really anchors sort of their frustration.
It acts like post-traumatic stress syndrome,
wow.
Right? It triggers memories.
Of course, there is stress if you've ever been to
Definitely.
There's nobody who sort of goes on holiday to a intensive care unit.
And intensive care is a place where you don't want to be in a hospital, right? You are monitored constantly with all these sensors attached to you. And emotionally, it's a very heavy environment, and physically, these patients can be sedated or they're monitored constantly. So that's what we try to create.
So you basically sort of visualize the problem when you enter, right?
Audioalized.
So that's so good. Or interactively audioalized. Yeah, so that's the word. And then I just tested it out briefly, and I thought, oh, this sounds kind of good. But then I realized that if you are there all day, you really go crazy, right? So if you've been there for a day or not?
I've been here every other day.
So very fatiguing, probably.
It is, yeah. Just like I said that it's
Yeah, so I think you've even made the problem a little bit more beautiful than it actually is. But so that's the first thing, and then there's the work that was done by Van Berlo, right? Poster.
Yeah, the research that was done, the initial research that was done is, like I said, it's a scientifically informed design solutions, right? We wanted to show it in this beautiful nurse journey that those were our core findings. So you hear the cacophony, you see where it comes from, you see some pictures of intensive care, and then we think that that is the current context. So you enter to the current context, and then you move on to the future.
Yeah.
It's a completely different story.
Yeah, then it becomes calmer, probably, right?
Yes, it does, more pleasant.
So, and they are part of this this booklet right here, the Critical Alarms Lab book, there's these are mainly graduation projects, or are they? So what you see is graduation project.
Yes, we have 2 graduation projects and 1 project from our integrated product design master's course, one of the main courses, advanced embodiment design. So that is the result of 5 students or 6 students worked on that product, but the other 2 are individual projects.
Yeah. So let's walk through all of them. So the first one you see is the first one I saw was a sort of a painting, right? So what is that? That's an interactive painting that to be put in the corridors of an intensive care unit. That project tackles behavior change. And it is not just an interactive painting, but it does represent the auditory quality of that environment. What we do is that we hear sound and we detect it with a dB meter. So we turn sound into data. Yeah.
And that data, through machine learning, is categorized into 4 main categories of sounds that can be found in the intensive care unit. But alarms, conversations, nurses, doctors talking, environment, background noise like machinery noise, imagine the mechanical ventilator and all.
The lungs, the thing, yeah.
All those support devices. And the 4th one is incidental sounds, keys dropping, doors opening. These are a bit of an interaction sounds with the environment. Yeah. So it does detect all this information and tries to visualize how heavily they occurred at a given time. But our system knows that throughout the day, there are peaks of sound. So at that time, like between 9 and 11, when the doctors do their rounds, it's bound to be a loud environment, or nurses clean the patients and breakfast comes in. So, and then we know that it's a time-sensitive issue, the categorizing these sounds. And all this categorized data with the time stamps becomes an interactive painting. This interactive painting shows how hostile
the environment is,
or how pleasant and calm the environment is. We have 4 stages, from very calm and serene, that you see, for example, very calm sea with sailing boats very slowly going, or in the very cacophonic version. It's a little bit grim to say, but the sailboats are turned upside down, there's buoys. All those objects, buoys or sailboats, they all represent a category of sound. Yeah. The more they are, the more sound there is. So what the nurse can do to look and reflect, it looks very noisy. So what can I do to change this? Yeah. So we didn't want nurses just to warn them, or this old-fashioned of
or another another warning that sounds like please be silent, please be silent.
We wanted to be subtle, and this interactive painting also is informative. You can click a button and see the information categories, and you get really facts from that. So that has also drawn a lot of attention from the public, because it's a very low threshold product and rule-rated designed Doppler. So that's the interactive.
So that's the name of the interactive painting.
Doppler. He tried to create the Doppler effect that we know when the ambulances pass by.
Yeah.
but the sounds dimmed. So one of the interesting things was that rule says we can't tell the nurse to keep quiet. Keeping quiet is like going on a diet, just like we cannot tell people stop eating. So we want them to do this moderately and allow them to see on the painting.
And maybe you sort of need elevated sound also to have that peace, right? Or is that sort of, you need moments of, but cacophony is of course always bad. But
it's always bad.
Yeah.
Well, patients also need their day routine with sound. So we cannot just tell everyone keep quiet because although they may be sedated, they still hear their environment. It's still subconsciously clear to them that it's hectic. So, yeah, for the day and night routine, definitely there needs to be some level of sound. We are not aiming at a complete silence, but we are also trying to understand how silent can we have these rooms. So that's one of our practices now.
Yeah. So this is sort of like it reminds me of sort of the air quality egg that has been done by hackers that sort of tells you how the quality of your air is. This is sort of the noise egg, right? Sort of the canary in the coal mine that warns you about too much sound.
Exactly.
And then there's one other one that I think was really interesting because it brought music in, and that maybe came from the person in the US, Washington, or?
Oh yes, that was Cartoons. You're talking about Cartoons. Cartoons is designed by Koen Bochers, but before Cartoons reached Koen, we have applied for TU Federation for money.
Yeah. Always nice.
Always nice. Because we wanted to be actually in the Mind the Step exhibition. That was one of our aims. So Design United granted us this money for prototyping.
All the technical universities in the Netherlands sort of combine in the Delft Dutch Design Week to show their work.
Mind the Step exhibition.
But that's in the Klokgebouw.
That's in the Klokgebouw.
And you're not there, it's here. So how did that happen?
Embassy of Health sounded more appropriate for the topic. So we found Koen, who is an amazing instruction designer, but also is a musician himself.
Yeah.
And so Koen worked with me, and when we applied for the grant, we had Yokos and the artist from Washington, D.C., and Joe Schlesinger from Vanderbilt University, an intensivist. So they all brought their knowledge into the topic. And the whole idea with Cartoons was that we hear, or the nurses and the patients hear, maybe up to 700 alarms a day.
Wow.
Imagine that.
One day, 24 hours or?
24 hours.
Yeah.
So it can be one alarm every 2 minutes, not only from one room, but as a collective number, right? And between 80 and 98% of these alarms are non-actionable.
So you cannot do anything with them?
Because they are not in an alarm state. The patient is still fine, but nurses often, they keep the alarm settings a bit narrow so that from a distance they can still hear and keep an ear on how the patient is doing. And while they want to be on the safe side...
It's sort of ambient audio information, something like that?
It is.
Yeah.
But it is at the stage, and nurses acknowledge this problem as well, that it's just creates cacophony, and it's not good for them and it's not good for the patient either. So what we thought, nurses still need this information, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't practice it this way. Can we have a different approach to it? Can we turn all those alarms into music? That's also, in a way, we wanted to provoke the public a bit to say that, you don't really need to have alarms that are so triggering, urging for, action, that maybe we can have music and then let people hear the same information, but in a much more pleasant and less tiring way. So what Cartoons does is that it gets information from the patient monitor, like your blood.
Basically the same information that the Doppler uses, but now.
No, it's not the same information. This information really comes from the sensors attached to the patient. blood pressure, oxygen saturation, heart rate. We simplified it to these 3 vitals, and it turns these vitals, the parameters, the data that comes from the patient, into music. So every patient would be creating their own music just by being connected to the sensors. And in its richest format, you really hear a beautiful ambient music in the background, because that's really is a piece of musical object.
So basically you're layering, I listened to it briefly, basically you're layering audio on top of each other, right? Sort of you have a bass line and a drum and sort of like that, but that's the different sensors?
Yes.
And if a patient is really sort of well, it becomes a complete musical instrument, and if some things are wrong, sort of parts of the music are missing, is that?
Yeah, so what we try to do is we assign for heart rate, for example.
That's good for tempo.
That's good for tempo, right? The beats. And then we said oxygen saturation could be represented by guitar chords, and blood pressure maybe with piano. Yeah. So we assign instruments to each of these vitals. And a musical piece, when everything is good, is not dissonant, right?
No, it's always
it's supposed to be balanced. Everything is balanced. But when something goes out of limit, we really create a dissonance to warn the nurse that, hey, something is getting out of limit. So it's not alarming yet.
It's still music.
Still music.
but a bit sort of there's like a bass drop sort of.
Yeah. Just be on your toes, but you don't have to act, you don't have to go. Just know that blood pressure has dropped a bit.
And then the actionable alarms are still sort of not music, right?
Not music, they are still the real deal.
The real deal.
Yeah. We call them true alarms.
True alarms.
Yes.
Nice. So that's an interesting way. And has this been tested by nurses?
Yes, it has been tested by nurses. They find it a novelty, of course, because it's very, very
They have
new.
to get used to it, maybe?
Yeah, and they need to wear an earpiece.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the ideas about, why the nurses want to have these alarms is that they want to operate from a distance. So they are away from the patient. And if that is the case, they're going to put their earpiece. If they need to go to the pharmacy or to the kitchen to prepare food for the patient, to get some drugs for the patient, they can still from a distance hear and without bothering anyone, but it's their just own piece. Yeah. We also redesigned the dashboard. We try to make it so that it's a little bit calmer and it fits the musical concept. Oh, nice. But so that's what I was saying, that in its richest format, it's a music, but for nurses, it's good to have musical updates that they are not a fully musical piece, but it's a musical way of giving the information.
Yeah, it's sort of, so you can briefly listen to the music, but also in the change of music, you sort of realize that there's something changing with the patient, right?
After all, it's a tool for nurses.
Yeah.
So we cannot play with that. We should really still keep the integrity of their job and their responsibilities.
Yeah. Interesting. That's I could have sort of imagined that as a visitor. So if you're related to that you also want to hear that music, right? Sort of. So I could imagine it also being valuable. So I could even imagine me being at home, sort of hearing the music of my father, if it were like
exactly. And because also for the family, these sounds, they don't make sense.
No.
They don't know why things drop or not, and it's just too stressful, and no one wants to be in
the peeps are sort of very scary, right?
Very scary, and you don't know, is it now the alarm, or is it going to ever happen? Yeah. That was one of the ideas in the concept development. We did consider whether we could use that musical information remotely, offer it to family at home, or how about pediatric ICUs where children are even they don't even know what alarms are. You know, these sounds are also very disturbing. Maybe bring it to them in a more playful way to make the environment a little bit more friendly.
Yeah.
So there are, we will still explore all those options, but this is, you know, at least a finished project.
And it has been an interesting collaboration between sort of many people from all over the world. And have they all sort of reflected on it as well? So,
yes.
So it's sort of it is a nice culmination of a collaboration. Right?
Yes, yes, definitely.
Wonderful. And then there's so this sort of this last one sort of automatically brings me to this is the last one that I saw, which was a sort of an intensive care unit that doesn't make any noise, basically, right?
It's we designed Ultimo.
And that's the integrated product design demo,
yes,
right?
It's really an engineering product. We redesigned an existing patient monitor. We looked into user needs, and we realized that there are all these beeps from the patient monitor, but the patient has no relevance to that. The patient makes it, but they don't use it. Very often these patient monitors stay together with the patient in the room when nurse is out monitoring from a distance. And the sound that's created in the patient room has to reach the nurse outside. And
so therefore it's very loud.
It has to be loud, and the patient has no relevance. Like we discussed, the family also don't know what does it mean if the oxygen saturation goes below 90, or is it 89, 85, or again 93? They have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
It's a number, and so we wanted to remove the stress from the family. We wanted to provide comfort for the patient to recover. So we thought, let's create a silent patient monitor.
Yeah.
The silent
there
patient
you go. No sounds to design.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying, that we don't always need to design sounds. It's about understanding how sound is relevant, right? So the Ultimo is again a connected system to the, you know, just like all the electronic devices in an intensive care unit. It detects who is in the room. If the patient is alone by himself or herself, Ultimo goes really silent.
Completely silent.
Completely silent. And we also changed the visual information, because still it being silent and providing too much visuals would again cause stress. So we designed that there's very little information. There's a heart just beats slowly, but it is active, but it is silent. And you will also see that Ultimo has a beautiful brain.
Oh,
we designed
this is not my brain as a so I see my heart sort of pulsates.
Pulsating.
So I at least I know that I have a heart. And then there's the brain, but
where
that's
all
not
the
my
information,
brain.
No, it's where all the information is calculated.
Yeah.
And,
so basically, you
people
know,
are
I'm in
sensed.
good hands as a
You're
patient.
in good hands.
Yeah.
But when the visitor comes, we have cameras, you know, detecting who comes in.
Yeah.
A visitor comes, +1, there's a patient plus one more person. And then Ultimo changes the monitor. We just give little information. So the family reflected that they still want to see a bit of information.
They want a number, right?
They still want a number.
It's also because the patient is not talking. There's something to look at.
There
right?
is something
it's
to look at.
Entertainment.
So we thought we all know how to check our pulse, and let's give them the heart rate. That's the most commonly known parameter. So it just shows the same image, only a heart rate number.
Yeah.
But when the nurse comes in, a clinician, they have beacons on their white coats. Yeah. And the camera detects, but also the system detects that a beacon has entered, and that must be a clinician. So Ultimo becomes alive again with sound and proper information.
And then you basically get the standard view again.
Exactly.
But also with the audio then?
Yes, with audio, because it is the nurses that need that information when they are there. And whenever a nurse is there, the patient will notice their presence. So having the sound
visitors.
and the visitors, having the sound will not have too much impact. But yet again, we want to test it in a clinical trial.
Yeah.
So that we want to prove to our society that, and especially regulatory agencies, FDA.
You don't want the beacon to sort of not work and then a patient dies, right?
Of course, we want to show that we have designed a system that actually works so that we can encourage regulatory agencies to say, okay, maybe we can be a bit more loose on the alarm standards.
Yeah.
Because that's the issue. There are all these directives, and they say every single electronic device in an intensive care unit has to have an alarm.
Of this sound level.
Yeah, a patient bed that has a heater with a pump that blows hot air in it has an alarm. So every single device in an intensive care unit is donned with alarms. So, and that comes with the law. So, medical.
And that's international law, or is that
international?
Wow.
So, or ISO standards.
Yeah.
ISO, International Standards Offices, or AMI from the states also dictates very often these rules. So yes, and we understand, we acknowledge the severity of the situation, but very often industry designs, I don't want to offend anyone, but I think industry designs with fear that they want to pass the FDA. And if we can
they
show...
sort of give up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, because...
Pick your battles, right?
Pick your battles, that's true. That's true, but...
And you've sort of picked another battlefield, which is the audio place, where designers are not confident because they don't have the tools, so therefore they just go, okay.
Let's give in, and that's the frequency range is this, and loudness level is that. Yeah. Let's just put the alarm and be safe. I mean, patient safety is very, very important.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong.
And if you are the designer of the heater you don't mind that it has an alarm because your product is important to you, right?
Yes, of course.
It's very hard to design for the fact that people don't notice it, right?
But that's true. But when we look at where alarms come from, the design of alarms, it dates back to 1950s.
Oh, yeah.
When the very first cardiac monitors were out there and one of the nurses missed visuals, it would be plotted on paper,
on
right?
On a paper, yeah, on a thermal paper, yeah, so, just like your stock exchange.
Yes, so it would be plotted there, and then when one of the nurses missed an alarm, they thought, or missed the important information, there were no alarms, they thought, let's add something auditory to draw the attention, but it was just one cardiac monitor, and now in intensive care unit every single product in there has an alarm. So I think in our future we can really reframe what alarms are and how does Internet of Things would play a role here. Yeah. We have artificial intelligence, machine learning. How can the system adapt to the user needs? And I think that's actually what I am fighting for in the critical alarms lab. So.
Yeah, so we're almost getting to the end. I just wanted to go back to your days of radio. So we are basically playing radio right now. This Out of the Blue podcast is, and so you talked about radio as something from the past. Is that how you feel about it, or do you sort of think it's still alive?
I think it is still alive, especially when you are in the car and and traveling. But I hardly hear or see people really tuning into the radio in their home environment, right? There's all these other products that you can just stream from the internet. So for me, radio is a bit of a nostalgia, but it still, has a very warm place in my heart. So if you're planning to have a radio station in our university, I would be happy to help.
Well, so this is basically a first step, and we definitely need. So we've already recorded a couple of episodes, and the audio quality is good, thanks to Geraldo and New Media Center, and the visuals are also very nice. But I think sort of adding well, not sort of the corny jingles where we push buttons, but sort of an ambience would be really valuable. So if you were to help us out on that, that would be awesome. Thank you. And that would also get me into the notion of what tools do you use for that stuff, because I'm also interested in the process. So that would be great. And then the other thing is, why do sort of we as designers, why should we make these? Is it a design thing to design alarms, or should we leave it to our disc jockeys?
I don't only design alarms, so I think maybe a designer wants to do more than just designing the alarm itself, and maybe we can simplify, tools for designing better alarms. But designing alarms, on the other hand, is a very complex problem. You don't just design the sound, you really have to understand what does that sound need to do? What information does it give?
Yeah, so it's basically an info-viz kind of thing, right? But info, not viz, but info-odd.
Oh, it is. I mean, we, for example, designed sound for the European Space Agency mission control rooms. And we had hours of audiovisual observation into the tasks of an operator and an engineer. It's the same as operator is the same as a nurse, engineer is the same as a surgeon or a doctor.
Yeah.
And they're monitoring these satellites and missions, and
you could sort of hear the satellites pass by.
We didn't create an auditory environment, but we made their job easier because they were just hearing one sound for 5 different main tasks that they could hear. There was no urgency mapped, nothing. And now we offered them, is the sound urgent? That's the first thing. And if not, is it informing?
Is it actionable?
Is actionable? And if it is urgent, what level? And what does it mean for the operator? So I hear one sound, I should see in the protocol exactly, I should imagine, go call the engineer, should be already embedded in the alarm sound. So on the one hand, it is actually quite a nice field for any person, any designer who wants to design alarms. It is not just designing the sound itself, but it really needs a user-centered approach.
Yeah, so that's what we're good at, right? Yeah. So, and then to finish off this episode, we always like to ask the guest if they have any tips for our viewers or our listeners on what sort of where to take this next. This doesn't have to be related to the Critical Alarms Labs, but do you have a tip for our listeners?
I think what I would like to see is that the notion of listening to our environment and how we listen and what do we hear should be taken early to the primary school stages, and be these young children, make them aware of their environment and the things that they listen to. I think one of our frustrations about sounds is that we don't know what the sound means. What does it represent? We always see it as a threat, but maybe there's beauty in the train that passes by you. You know, maybe there's a beautiful sound to capture. Or why don't we enjoy our bike sounds when we're pedaling or when we're going over loose tiles? So I think the way we learn how to listen to sounds can also make our interactions with the environment much happier and more pleasant, because sound is everywhere in our environment.
And do you have practical tips to sort of how you could sort of give that to your kids, or blindfold them? Is that the solution?
That could be talk about it, listen. Blindfolding is good just to hide the other senses and focus on the sound. Go explore, touch objects, make sound. But always talk. Talking is very, very important, as important as listening. So, definitely, that would be also one of my dreams.
So a vocabulary around sound, you mean, right? Sort of talking about, So, and because my tip is related both to the Dutch Design Week and a bit to that audio. I was at the Dutch Design Week on Tuesday, and there is in the Veemgebouw, there is on the 6th floor, there's like a startup company that is interested in virtual reality. You know, they have the HTC goggles and the Oculus ones, and they have different installations. And I had my youngest daughter in there, and we really enjoyed it. But what I liked most is they had one very calm, interesting experience, which was parachuting, paragliding. And you could sort of steer your parachute in a virtual reality with the goggles on, but the audio was so nice because you could really hear it from the sort of, you could hear the rock pass you by and the waterfall on the right, and that sort of, I had the tendency to close my eyes in virtual reality, also because it's quite uncomfortable, but sort of because the resolution is still not optimal, but it really helped sort of for the maximum enjoyment, sort of putting your ears down is a really good way. I think have you actually parachuted?
No.
No, me neither. I don't want to. I think the audio is much worse than it is in that thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a lot of noise on your ears, but this was really a great experience.
Yeah.
So I really urge, it's open even after the Dutch Design Week, and the operators I had were really nice to kids. Although the Oculus VR doesn't fit the kids, they still would help them. But it has some interesting and really evocative sort of ways to explore virtual reality.
And I think you should catch them while they are young, right? They are
Yes.
still interested, they still want to learn. So such installations really help to intrigue them into the world of sounds. That's also we hope to do here in our exhibition.
Yeah, wonderful. So, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for talking to us, Elif. With this, we end this session. If you have feedback, please send it to a.i.keller@tudelft.nl. And I want to thank Geraldo and Mark, Geraldo of the New Media Center and Mark of our communication department. And we hope to see you again later for our next conversation with a researcher or educator. Thank you. Hey. Woo, time flew.